Have you ever just stood and looked at a massive tree, like a giant redwood, and thought, how? How does something that huge come from a tiny little seed and then just keep on growing for centuries? Well, today we're digging in and uncovering the incredible secrets behind how plants grow and develop.
So what is the big secret? I mean, think about it. Most animals, including us, we have a pretty fixed body plan. We grow to a certain size, and that's it. But plants, they can just keep on growing for their entire lives. So how do they pull off this seemingly magical trick of unlimited growth? Let's get into it.
All right, so the first secret, it's all about this sort of perpetual engine that plants have built right into their systems. It's a mechanism that lets them constantly crank out new cells for as long as they live.
And this engine is made of something called meristems. You can think of them as the plant's own little stem cell factories, or maybe a biological fountain of youth. These are very specific spots where cells are just constantly dividing, pushing the plant up towards the sky, out to the sides, and deeper into the ground.
And you've got two main players here. First, they're the apical meristems. You'll find these at the very tips of the roots and the shoots, and their whole job is adding length, making the plant taller and its roots dig deeper. But then you've got the lateral meristems. These guys are all about increasing the plant's girth, making a tree chunk wider and wider every single year. Yep, that's what creates those tree rings you can count.
Now, all this growth isn't just some chaotic explosion of cells. No way. It actually follows a very precise mathematical blueprint. But before we get into the math, let's just take a second to appreciate the sheer power of this growth engine.
The power we're talking about is, well, it's just staggering. Get this, a single root tip on a corn plant can produce over 17,500 new cells every single hour. That is almost 5 new cells every second, constantly pushing down into the soil to find water and nutrients. It's amazing. And it's not just about the number of new cells, it's about their incredible ability to expand. A single cell in a watermelon can increase its size by up to 350,000 times. That's how you go from a tiny little flower to a massive, heavy fruit. So how does all this happen in an organized way? Well, it mostly follows two main models. On one hand, you have arithmetic growth. That's where one cell divides, and its sister cell just matures and stops dividing. This creates a really steady, linear increase in cells, which is perfect for something like a root that needs to get longer at a constant rate. But then, you have geometrical growth. This is where both new cells keep on dividing, leading to this exponential explosion of cells. This is the engine of rapid growth.
And this diagram really spells it out, doesn't it? Arithmetic growth is that steady 1 + 1 + 1 process. But geometric growth is multiplicative. It's that doubling effect that creates the explosive growth you see when a tiny seedling first bursts out of the ground, just scrambling to build leaves and a stem to catch the sunlight.
Now this geometrical growth, when you map it out over time in the real world, it creates that classic S-shaped curve. It starts out a little slow, that's the lag phase, then it just rockets upwards during the log or exponential phase, and finally it levels off in the stationary phase, usually because resources like nutrients or even just space start to run out. Okay, so we have the engine and we have the blueprint. But who's in charge? Who's directing all this activity? Well, that brings us to our third big secret, a super sophisticated chemical command center run by tiny molecules called Plant Growth Regulators.
Plant Growth Regulators, or PGRs for short, are kind of like the conductors of the plant's orchestra. They're these small chemical messengers that float around, telling different parts of the plant when to grow, when to stop, when it's time to make flowers, or even when it's time to drop their leaves for the winter.
And what's really wild is just how diverse these chemical signals are. They're not all one kind of molecule. They can be anything from complex compounds like terpenes to something as simple as ethylene, which, by the way, is the exact same gas that makes your bananas ripen on the counter. This chemical variety gives the plant an incredibly subtle and powerful toolkit to manage its entire life.
You know, cracking this chemical code has been a huge scientific journey. It started over 100 years ago with someone noticing a gas coming off ripe oranges, and it continued for decades as scientists isolated these key regulators one by one, often from the most unexpected places, like a fungus that infects rice, or even, get this, herring sperm DNA.
So, inside this chemical command center, there is a constant balancing act. You can think of it as a fundamental duel between signals that scream go and other signals that whisper stop. This internal tug-of-war is what dictates pretty much everything a plant does. This duel really boils down to two teams.
On one side, you have the growth promoters, the go signals. These are things like auxins and gibberellins, and they're pushing for more cell division, for making flowers and fruit. On the other side, you have the growth inhibitors, the stop signals. These, like abscisic acid, manage things like stress, dormancy, and the annual shedding of leaves.
A perfect example of this in action is something called apical dominance. The main growing tip of a plant, which is powered by a promoter called auxin, actively suppresses the side buds. It's telling them, hey, hold on, we're focusing on growing taller right now. But if you've ever pruned a plant, you've seen what happens next. You snip off that top bud, the inhibitory signal is gone, and bam, the side branches just spring to life. It's a constant chemical conversation. And let's be clear, the inhibitors are not the bad guys here. They are absolutely critical for survival. Abscisic acid, or ABA, is famously known as the stress hormone. When a plant starts to dry out, ABA levels shoot up, sending a clear message to the tiny pores on its leaves, the stomata, to close up shop and conserve water. It's a lifesaver.
Okay, so let's put all the pieces together. You have the growth engine, the mathematical blueprint, and that complex chemical command center. When they all work in concert, we arrive at the final masterpiece, a complex, incredibly adaptable organism that can specialize its cells and literally change its own shape to survive.
One of the absolute coolest things plants can do is this cycle of specialization. First, cells differentiate to do a very specific job, like carrying water. But amazingly, some of those cells can then de-differentiate. They basically go back to being a blank slate and regain the ability to divide. And then they can re-differentiate into a completely new type of cell, whatever is needed. It is the ultimate cellular recycling program.
And all of this culminates in a concept that scientists call plasticity. It's the plant's incredible ability to change its own body plan in response to what's going on around it. Is it growing in water or in dry air? Is it a young seedling or a mature plant? It can actually adapt its physical form to match the situation.
You can see this with your own eyes in plants like cotton or even coriander. The leaves they put out when they're young look totally different from the leaves on the mature plant. That's not two different species. That is one single plant's incredible plasticity, live and in action, adapting its form as it goes through its life. So from that perpetual motion engine of the meristem, all the way to the complex chemical language of hormones, the story of how a plant grows is just one of incredible elegance and power, which leaves us with a pretty fascinating question. As we get better and better at understanding this chemical command center, how can we use that knowledge to partner with plants and shape a more resilient and abundant future for all of us?